Welcome to Criminalist Behavior Podcast, the podcast that takes you deep into the heart of Louisiana's history and current, most chilling true crime stories. I'll be guiding you through the darkness of these crimes and all of those involved. Each week, we dig deep on those forgotten crimes or those crimes currently happening with the underlying legends that continue to haunt us. So lean in, listen, and get ready, because true crime is anything but ordinary. Stay with me as we unravel what happened in these mysteries. If this is your first time listening, hi, my name is Sarah Soudier, and I'm your host for Criminalist Behavior Podcast. Today, we're on episode number 43, and it's about serial killer Danny Harold Rawling. Now, some other people might know this famous killer as the Gainesville murderer. So, I want to thank you for listening to the show first and foremost, and I really hope you enjoy it. So, trigger warning, this episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised. So, I got a little late start on this for the week because I've been working hella overtime. So, I'm going to get this out to you. Beware, this may be actually a two-parter because it's a lot. And I am just going to jump right on in. So, Danny Harold Rawling was born May 26, 1954. And he is also known as the Gainesville Ripper. And he was an American serial killer who murdered 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida over a 4-day period in August of 1990. However, since I do cases in Louisiana, he did kill people in Shreveport, Louisiana, and this is why I got this particular case, is because that is little known about him, about killing the people in Shreveport. Most people know him only as the college student killer, but he in fact killed people in Shreveport. He actually later confessed to raping several of his victims and committing a triple homicide in the home city of Shreveport, Louisiana, and he actually attempted to murder his father in May of 1990. In total, Rawlings confessed to killing 8 people, and his killing spree inspired the slasher film, everybody knows it, Scream. So, Scream, you know, the little black, all dressed up in black with a little ghost face. Yeah, that movie is based off of Danny Rawlings. So, Daniel, also known as Danny, was one of 2 sons born to James Harold Rawling and Claudia Beatrice. James was a Korean War veteran in the U.S. Navy and a Shreveport police officer. He often abused his wife and sons for these frivolous things, such as breathing in a way that he just wasn't pleased with. He also told his son that he was unwanted from birth. So that's just screwed up in itself, right? No child wants to hear that they weren't wanted. In one incident, Rawlings' mother was hospitalized after her husband, James, tried to make her cut herself with a razor blade. So James is just like a sick individual, right? Like father, like son, right? So the first incident of physical abuse towards Danny was when Danny actually just first started crawling. Now, most babies start crawling, just depends, but between 6 and 8 months. And James seemed to be more violent towards Danny after Danny's brother was born. And James started beating Danny when he started crawling because he didn't want his son to be crawling. He didn't like the way his son was crawling, and he just beat him. The children were not allowed to have birthdays or holidays. And that is just distraught, because imagine going to school and all your friends and other parts of your family is celebrating their birthday and holidays. Well, Danny and his brother just never had that opportunity from when they were born, which is horrible, because I go all out for my children's birthdays, and I also get them every little thing for like Christmas or whatever. We celebrate the holidays, and I also go all out for Christmas. And the fact that these children didn't have that, but every one of their peers did, it's a very psychological threat to them becoming normal, because they're not associated with normalcy in this family. At age 5, several things took place. Danny's father tied him up about 6 times in a 6-month period, so like once a month. In another situation, Danny tried stealing a candy bar, but was caught by his parents and made to return to the store and apologize to the store owner, which I have nothing wrong to say about that particular incident. Because if your child steals from the store, you're going to make them bring it back and apologize profusely to the store and or offer to pay for it. I mean, that's just something that a normal person would do. But one day, James, Danny's father, found a puppy while he was working, and he decided to take that puppy home. Danny became very fond of the puppy and was glad he had something to confide in, something to love, and loved him. But James, Danny's father, constantly beat the dog. And according to Danny and their neighbors, James later killed the dog by repeatedly torturing it. And the dog actually died in Danny's arms. What? That's just so messed up. To have an animal die of natural causes, it still greatly affects someone. But because your father tortured and beat this dog, that this dog died in your arms, that is some emotional trauma. Because my pets are like my family. Like, that's my other kids. They're my fur babies. That's just so freaking horrible. This is the first reported case of James refusing to hug or show affection to his son Danny. James believed that hugging was sissy stuff, and he refused to hug his own son. At age 9, Claudia suffered from a nervous breakdown. Danny failed the 3rd grade for repeatedly missing school due to different types of illnesses. And school counselors described Danny as suffering from an Danny's school counselors described him as suffering for an inferiority complex. Sorry, I'm going to get it out. But he had aggressive tendencies and poor impulse control. And the counselors actually recommended that Danny receive counseling, but Danny never did. At age 10, in an attempt to teach boys how to drive, James slapped Danny in the face and just belittled him for not knowing how to use the clutch. Like, his father expected him to already know how to drive. And I know most people today don't know how to drive a clutch. I mean, the standard vehicle nowadays is just automatic. Back then, though, it was a standard transmission. But Danny failed the 3rd grade again. So Danny just kept having problems trying to pass the 3rd grade. And his daddy obviously made that just very difficult for him. And then after age 11, Danny walked in on his parents having an argument. His mother slit her wrist with a razor blade and then locked herself in the bathroom. Danny's father, James, knocked down the door and continued to argue with Claudia, rolling. Danny watched as his mother laid on the floor just bleeding out. And Claudia was eventually committed to the hospital. Danny tried to stop his father from beating his mom, and in return, he was beaten for interfering with it. Danny began to play the guitar, and he would sing prayers. He started to fantasize about sadistic violence, and the fantasies became more sexually violent. He began to have a serious alcohol problem, and he actually stole alcohol, and he got it from his friends. That was at age 11, y'all. At age 12, James, the dad of Danny, beat Danny for not receiving a haircut for school. He beat Danny with a belt buckle and shaved his head. Kids teased him as a result and called him names such as Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Children could be so cruel. Really cruel. But his father just tortured the hell out of him. And his mom. It's just so wrong. Danny's father actually attempted to kill his mother. And Danny's father found him drinking with a friend, and his father actually drug him home by the neck and was actually jailed for 2 weeks for that one particular incident. Danny refused to talk to his mother. He grabbed a knapsack and he ran away from home. He spent his first night in the neighboring woods, and he actually, and this is going to be like a little sick and graphic, so beware, I'm warning you. He masturbated to fantasies of killing people and controlling them. He returned home when that hunger started consuming him. At age 13, you see how it's progressing? 13, Danny and his brother Kevin were actually handcuffed together on the floor after not cutting the grass to their father's liking, while their father knelt down on their backs, crushing their lungs. Danny kept trying to plead with his father to stop, and he actually threatened to kill himself. At age 14, Danny actually saw a naked girl for the first time, and he actually started becoming a peeping Tom because he began peeking through the neighbor's bathroom window, and he actually got caught by the neighbors twice. The father caught Danny and beat him on the ground. Danny was still being beat by his father in an attempted suicide, but failed. Danny had dreams of people beating and torturing him with demons going through him. He was thrown out of his home by his father after a fight over whether he could wear jeans to church or not. His father threw his 14-year-old son out because Danny wanted to wear jeans to church. Danny's mother snuck him back home that very night. I'm sure she received repercussions for doing so. At age 17, Danny threatened his father that if he didn't sign him up for the Navy, he would run away from home for good. He had dropped out of high school by this time, but he received his high school equivalent diploma, which we know as a GED. But Danny actually failed the Navy enlistment test, and he joined the Air Force in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. He worked as a security police and strategic air command at Homestead AFB in Florida. He actually became the first airman, first class, but he tripped on acid over 100 times, and he started dabbling into other types of drugs. Acid is a hallucinogen. Like, why are you doing this? I mean, you had a screwed up childhood, bro. Like, I get it. But why? Like, you got out and you joined the Air Force, and things should start be looking up for you right now. At age 18, Danny was actually locked up because of a drug possession charge for disobeying the orders. He lost his stripes in the Air Force, and he was diagnosed by a psychiatrist as having a personality disorder. And he was actually forced to leave the Air Force with a honorable discharge. Danny Rawlings lost his virginity when he was high on LSD, and he regretted it that very next morning. And this is at age 18. So at 18, he was already dipping into other drugs, acid, LSD, and he actually had sex for the first time. And between the ages of 19 and 29, after he was discharged from the Air Force, Danny returned to Shreveport to live with his grandfather, and he actually found religion at a Pentecostal church. Danny was baptized, and he became involved in many different church activities. He met a girl named Omatha Ann Holko, which he thought God made specifically for him. He ended up marrying Omatha, and at the time of that marriage, Omatha actually found out she was pregnant. So he and his wife had a daughter, and they named her Kylie Danielle. And then things started taking another turn for Danny as he began to feel the pressure of working 2 jobs to try to make ends meet. He began drinking and smoking marijuana. Again, he left the church, and he acted so irrational that Omatha became afraid of him. He would threaten her life repeatedly. He would also run off for hours or days without even telling Amatha anything. So he was spiraling down. I mean, he's seen how he probably thought that that's how you treat people, because he was never involved in a situation that was normal for him to know what a normal relationship or marriage would consist of. So as an adult, he had trouble trying to fit into the society. He couldn't stay at a job. And at one point, he actually worked as a waiter at a restaurant in Bossier City, Louisiana, called Poncho's. He actually got caught peeking in windows and returned home to his wife by an officer. Danny said that he claimed to see weird things like a UFO, demons, ghost, and Jesus. So he was losing it. His wife called his parents when he stopped going to work, and his father came to the house and put a knife to his throat. Danny was caught peeking in windows and returned home to his wife by an officer. But Danny put a gun to his wife's head when she said she was going to leave him. He threatened to kill her and ex-boyfriend when he actually caught Amatha and her ex-boyfriend having an affair. Danny beat up Amatha's ex-boyfriend and Amatha after she threatened to leave him and turned the gun on himself. Amatha kept trying to plead with him to stop. She filed for a separation, and this just devastated Danny to his core. Amatha and Danny ended up getting divorced 6 months later. And this is when Danny actually committed his first rape on a woman who actually resembled Amatha. He got in a bad car accident that resulted in a woman's death. And this actually played high on his psychological well-being. It just tormented him. He robbed a Winn-Dixie supermarket in Montgomery, Alabama of just $800. He was sentenced to served 2 concurrent 6-year terms for armed robberies at that time. The first time Danny's mom actually saw him in prison, she described him as being thin and very just distressed. By her second visit, he had put weight on and was starting to do what other people in prison do, because they ain't got time to do nothing else. And he started going into bodybuilding. He seemed to have learned how to cope with the prison life. At age 30, which is 1984, he was released from the Alabama prison, and he returned to Shreveport to see his mom and his dad. He stayed there for a short time until him and his father got into another fight. This is when Danny decided to go stay with his Aunt Agnes until he actually returned back home to his parents. Danny broke into a young girl's home after watching her for several hours. His intent was to rape her, but she started crying, and he actually felt bad. Shocker, right? He actually felt bad once the girl started crying. He decided not to rape her. Instead, they talked, had a cup of coffee, they sang songs to each other, and then they actually engaged in what he says was consensual sex. She took him home, and then he fled town in fear that she would actually call the police on him. Which, that would mean that the sex wasn't consensual, right? Danny traveled to Camarillo, California to visit his aunt, uncle, and his cousin. He then hitchhiked all around for about 6 or 7 months, visiting more family in Florida. He then moved in with his aunt and uncle in California, and that only lasted for about 3 months. He left without notice, claiming he had to go see his daughter back in Shreveport. This is when Danny got into a bad motorcycle accident and was treated for a concussion and nerve damage to his neck. He hitchhiked a ride from Camarillo to Boulder, Colorado, and he actually stayed in Colorado for about 2 weeks. He then traveled to the Black Hills of South Dakota for about 2 weeks and continued on to Columbus, Georgia for another month. He robbed a Kroger supermarket of $290, and he got caught. He pled guilty to the Kroger robbery, and then he spent 4 more years in Jackson County Jail. Now, Danny actually escaped from Jackson County Jail by just walking off and swimming the Snake River that ran through Jackson, Mississippi. Danny was paroled from the Mississippi Penitentiary under the conditions that he would return to Shreveport, Louisiana. Danny got fired from his job because his boss claimed that he missed 3 consecutive days of work, and when Danny was actually confronted about missing those 3 days consecutively, Danny actually went into a fit of rage and threatened to kill the manager and the cook. Psycho. So here we are. We got the making of a serial killer, right? 1, how was his childhood? Very abusive, aggressive. He got beat. 2, he got teased by the people in the school because his daddy shaved his head. 3, he met someone. He was having dark thoughts. He got caught peeping in windows. Arrested. Had to spend 12 years in prison. Got out. And then just kept fantasizing about raping people. He had no real love or anything towards him. He got in 2 wrecks. 1 gave him a concussion. We're sitting here checking off all these boxes because that's the making of a serial killer. It really freaking is. Any serial killer, this is the making. They had something happen that traumatized them in their childhood. They got in a bad wreck, concussions. This all adds up. So, like I said, he threatened to kill his manager and his cook. When Danny was 35 years old, in about 1989, there was 3 bodies found. Those bodies were Julie Grissom, age 24, her father, Tom Grissom, and Julie's nephew, Sean, who was just 8 years old. The medical examiner estimated the time of death to be 2 days prior, which would be 2 days prior to when Danny actually lost his job for threatening to kill the manager and the cook. So, the following year, Danny and his father continued to have this lovely altercation, and they were fighting. Danny left and started wandering the streets. He came upon a house where he watched a woman undress before he decided to break into the home. Danny actually broke into the home later on. I'm not sure if it was the same day or a day later, but long story short, Danny broke into the home. No one was home. And he actually waited for that girl he was previously watching to return. He made himself comfortable. He was watching TV, listened to her stereo, and sampled all her alcohol collection. She actually never came back, so he stole about $30 worth of dimes, a 5th of Chivas Regal, and a .38 caliber revolver. Lucky for this woman, she did not return. Danny again got in another fight with his father. He shot James once in the stomach and again in the forehead. Danny broke into the home of Michael Kennedy, stole 2 more handguns and identification papers of the deceased Michael Kennedy Jr., and he actually went and robbed another store. He robbed Westwood United Superstore, and this time he got away with $1,661. He was actually videotaped telling witnesses, "Thank you, God bless, please pray for me, God knows I need it." Danny returned to Westwood United Superstore and stole another $2,001. So here we go. He's not stopping. He's not stopping. On July 9th of 1990, Danny made collect calls to Shreveport, in which this time he actually described hiding in the woods and evading the police. He tried cocaine for the first time, and he took a bus to Sarasota, Florida. It was there that he began his transition into the alias he called himself, Michael Kennedy Jr. He set up camp in a wooded area within 2 miles of all the crime scenes that would eventually be discovered. And in August 1990, he actually burglarized an apartment of Christopher Osborne. He stole Chris's car and he drove to Tampa, Florida. There, when he arrived at Tampa, he started breaking in and stealing from several houses and a convenience store, leaving a trail of evidence everywhere he went. In August of 1990, Danny murdered 5 students, 1 student from Santa Fe College and 4 from the University of Florida, during a robbery spree in Gainesville, Florida, is when this occurred. He actually mutilated his victim's body. He decapitated one of them, and then he posed them, sometimes using mirrors. Santa Fe College, in case y'all didn't know, is a college located in Gainesville, Florida, and it offered both associate and baccalaureate degree programs and was established in 1965 by Florida legislature as Santa Fe Junior College. The institution began classes in 1966, and it was renamed to Santa Fe Community College in 1972 and became Santa Fe College in 2008, focusing on their bachelor programs. So he murdered that 1 person from Santa Fe College and then the 4 from University of Florida. Now, we're currently at 26 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and give you a couple of the victims, and then we'll go from there, right? We're going to see how long this lasts. But August 24th, 1990, in the early morning hours, Danny broke into the apartment shared by 2 university freshmen. First, Sonia Larson, who was 18 years old, and then second, Christina Powell, who was 17 years old at the time. Danny found Powell sleeping on the sofa downstairs as he stood over her briefly, but he didn't wake her up. He chose to go upstairs in a bedroom where Sonia was sleeping. Danny murdered Sonia first, and he did this by first taping her mouth shut to try to defuse her screams, and then he stabbed her to death with a K-bar knife as Sonia literally tried fighting him and trying to defend herself, but she actually died trying to defend herself. So, I mentioned a K-bar knife. Those, in case you're living under a rock, is a combat knife that was actually first adopted by the United States Marine Corps in 1942 as a combat knife. And it later was issued by the United States Marine Corps as a Mark II combat knife or a fighting utility knife. It was actually adopted by the United States Navy afterwards, and it was the name of a knife manufacturing company called K-Bar Knives. So this is the knife that he used to kill Sonia and then eventually Christina. So K-Bar Knives Incorporation currently still makes a wide variety of knives and cutlery, and it's actually best known for its utility and fighting knife, which was a 7-inch 1095 carbon steel clip point blade with a leather washer handle. So after Danny killed Sonia upstairs, he then headed back downstairs where he taped Powell's mouth shut, bound her by the wrist behind her back, and threatened her with the knife as he cut her clothes off of her body. He then raped her, forced her face down onto the floor, where he killed her by stabbing her 5 times in the back. After killing Powell, Danny went back upstairs and raped Larson's corpse. So necrophilia. He posed the bodies in sexual provocative positions, and he took a shower and then left the apartment. Just fucking sick. Raped her, then demoralized her, put her on her fucking stomach face down, and just stabbed her 5 times in the back. That's just so freaking gruesome. So gruesome. Then had sex with her, like the dead corpse that he just killed in the upstairs bedroom. Just can't. I just can't. August 25th of 1990, Danny Rawlings broke into another apartment. This apartment was owned by Krista Hoyt, who was an 18-year-old chemistry honor student at Santa Fe College. He actually pried the sliding glass door open with a screwdriver. And Krista wasn't home at the time he pried the, glass door open, but he waited for her. And once she got back home, Krista was startled by Danny. And Danny immediately placed her in a chokehold. And after he subdued her by choking her out, he then duct taped her mouth. And he bound her wrists together behind her back and led her into the bedroom. This is where he cut the clothes from her body and raped her. So the same scenario that happened in Powell's murder. He forced her to lie face down into the bed and stabbed her in the back, rupturing her aorta. He then flipped her body over and sliced her abdomen open from her pubic bone, all the way up to her breastbone. So from her groin all the way up to her chest. He then fled to his campsite, and then he realized he couldn't find his wallet. He actually thought he may have dropped it or left it at one of the murder scenes, which is when he decided to return back to the murder scenes. This is whenever he decided he wanted to decapitate Krista. He posed her body in a sitting position at the edge of her bed and placed her head on a shelf facing the corpse. He later claimed his intent was to add to the shock of whomever discovered Krista's body. So, that's a lot to fucking take in. A lot to take. I don't even know how he got the body to stay up, first and foremost. You raped her. You stabbed her in the back. So much that she was bleeding out. Aorta. One of the main valves in the heart. Bleeding out profusely. You ripped from her pubic bone to her chest with this knife. Then returned to the scene, decapitated her, sat her up at the edge of the bed with her head on a shelf facing her mutilated body. I don't even want to picture that fucking crime scene. I don't know how he got that to actually... I don't understand. I don't. Of course, I will never begin to understand. I'm not inside this mind, but clearly there's some fucked up thinking going on in his mind. Clearly fucked up thinking. By this time, the murders actually attracted a widespread media attention. Many students had begun taking extra precautions, such as changing their daily routines and sleeping together in groups as opposed to being solo in their beds. And because the killing spree was happening so early in the fall semester, some students actually withdrew their enrollment and transferred to other schools. Which, hell yeah, I don't fucking blame you. We got a mass murderer out on the loose. Can't be caught. And his crimes are progressively getting worse. Worse. Because not only are you just killing these people, the way you're killing them, so aggressive, imposing their bodies. Now you're decapitating, you're gutting them, pretty much, and having sex with their corpse. Like, just make it stop. August 27, 1990, 23-year-old Tracy Pauls was living with her roommate, Manny Tobata, who was also 23. Danny broke into their apartment by prying it open by the sliding glass door, which he used the same tools as he used previously, that screwdriver. And he found that Manny was asleep in one of the bedrooms, and he killed Manny after a struggle. Hearing all of this take place, this is when Tracy actually got up, went down the hall, and went into Manny's bedroom and saw Danny Rawlings. She attempted to barricade herself in the bedroom, but this is when Danny broke through the door, and he actually taped Tracy's mouth shut and her wrists, cut off her clothing, and raped her before turning her over, stabbing her 3 times in the back, and then he posed her body, but he left Manny in the same position in which Manny died. Now, Manny was the first male victim of Danny. So, I know Manny, Danny could be sounding confusing, but Danny killed Manny and then went in and killed Tracy. So, with the exception of Manny, all of the victims were petite white brunettes with brown eyes who resembled Danny's mom, Claudia. Although law enforcement initially had very few leads, they actually developed 2 suspect leads. One suspect was named Edward Lewis Humphrey, who was a 20-year-old University of Florida student who had a history of a mental illness, and he actually was previously convicted for felony assault against his grandma. He was held in custody for 5 months until a grand jury refused to indict him on murder charges. And the grand jury's reason for failing to indict him was because they had insufficient evidence. So Edward Humphrey, his photo was actually distributed between all of the media outlets. And this is whenever authorities publicly cleared him of all charges once they arrested Danny. Now, Danny started taking medication for his manic depression, which aka bipolar disorder is what some people may know it as. And he ended up graduating in 1994 from a local college. This is where he then started studying part-time, and he graduated in 2000 from the University Center of Florida as a magna cum laude. The other suspect, Edward, was actually cleared at this time. So, I know you hear a lot about a grand jury, and obviously we know that grand jury is a group of individuals that come together to determine if there's enough of evidence to charge a person with a particular crime. But what exactly makes up a grand jury, right? It is a jury, a group of citizens who were empowered by law to conduct legal proceedings, investigate potential criminal conduct, and determine whether criminal charges should be brought upon this individual. And they may subpoena physical evidence or a person to testify, but it is separate from the courts, which do not preside as functioning. The grand jury has been described as a shield and sword type of analogy that has both an offensive purpose and a defensive purpose. It has been called a shield of many people against the power of the crown, and it's been described as the sword of the people. The function of a grand jury is to accuse people who may be guilty or not guilty of a crime, but it's also a shield against unfounded and oppressive prosecution, so wrongfully being prosecuted if there's not enough evidence to suggest that this person is guilty. It is actually a means for the citizens, a representative of the community, to participate in the administration of justice. It can make presentments on crime maladministration, and it actually consists of 23 members. So, the grand jury failed to indict Edward, but they then had enough evidence to bring Danny to the picture. So then, after all of this, there was a tip about Danny Rawlings being the suspect in the Shreveport murders. You know, those 4 bodies? Louisiana police alerted the Florida Police Department to an unsolved triple murder that happened in Shreveport on November 4th of 1989. Detectives noted that there were similarities between the Gainesville murders and those of 55-year-old Tom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and 8-year-old grandson Sean. Their family had been attacked in their home as they were preparing dinner, and Julie Grissom's body had been mutilated, cleaned, and posed. So the same forte as all of Danny's murders, because we know that he poses his bodies. So an investigator named Don Maines with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement traveled to Shreveport in November of 1990 because the similarities between the Gainesville murders and the Shreveport murders were very high up there. They included posing the victims, tape residue on the victim's body because he would tape their mouths, bound them by the wrist, and then he actually used vinegar to clean the body, trying to dispose any evidence. And Don Maines stated that they tested the body fluids from the Shreveport crime scene and found that this person had type B blood, because at this time DNA wasn't in its infancy, right? This DNA just started being introduced, and they actually used to use DNA as blood typing type evidence, as opposed to mitochondrial or any of that other nature for touch DNA, any other DNA means, because that wasn't there at this time. And Don Maines stated that the match to the evidence in the Gainesville and the Shreveport murders was actually a turning point in the case, because they both matched one another, because they were actually able to retrieve some DNA from all the crime scenes. So shortly after Don Maines went to Shreveport, a Shreveport resident named Cindy Jerkich called Crime Stoppers and reported that Danny Rawlings was possibly connected to the murders in both Gainesville and Shreveport. It was Cindy's tip whenever she was on a trip through Florida's Panhandle in August of 1990 when she heard the news report about the string of murders that occurred in Florida. And this actually made Cindy think about the man from her hometown church in Louisiana in Shreveport who used to spend time with her and her family. And 3 months prior to this, in August of 1990, Cindy heard a news report about the string of murders as she traveled to the Florida Panhandle, and it made her think of Danny Rawlings, who she actually met at a Louisiana hometown church. And she thought that this could possibly link Danny to the murder of the Grissoms in Shreveport, Louisiana. And Danny said deeply disturbing things to both her and her then husband, Stephen Dobbin. And this is what Cindy stated, Danny stated. He'd come over every night for a while, and then one night, whenever her husband Stephen came in, he goes, he's got to go to church. And when Cindy said that Doblin told her that Danny told him he had a problem, I'm sorry, I just got lost. So Cindy and her husband, right? They're at their house, and Danny's over there, and he actually stated that he had a problem. And then Stephen, Cindy's husband, asked Danny, what kind of problem? And this is whenever Cindy and Stephen were having this conversation after Danny left. And Stephen told Cindy that the problem that Danny had was he likes to stick knives into people. And Cindy stated that she dismissed these comments from her husband Stephen because when she first heard about them, she didn't want to believe that Danny Rawlings could be responsible for those Shreveport murders. But Stephen had this guilty thing. Not sure if it was through small talk with Danny or not, but he actually developed this lead that Danny had a problem with sticking knives into people. So this is when one day Danny told Cindy the following. One day, I'm going to leave this town, and I'm going to go where all the girls are beautiful, and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day. Now, that's a little creepy, first and foremost, but this could then lead everyone to think about, where can you find a place where girls are so beautiful and they're laying in the sun where he could watch them all day without repercussion? It is a beach, right? So the news of the Gainesville murders in Florida haunted Cindy so much that she actually finally decided to contact the police in November based on what she thought was a hunch about Danny's connection to the murders in both Shreveport and Gainesville. And this is what she stated. It would not let me rest. One day I picked up the phone, I called Crime Stoppers, and I said, I think there's one guy y'all need to really investigate. And I gave them the name of Danny Rawlings. So investigators actually responded to that tip from Cindy, and they quickly found Danny. And this is when Danny was arrested on September 7th, 1990, for a robbery he committed at a supermarket in Osceola, Florida. Now, the robbery had been committed 10 days after the bodies of Pauls and Tobata were found. So, Danny was being held in Marion County Jail, which was 40 miles south of the Gainesville. Investigators determined that Danny had type B blood, which came up in the DNA evidence on all the crime scenes. And once Florida investigators realized that Danny had multiple convictions for armed robbery, they realized he could also be responsible for the bank robbery that occurred on the day of Krista Hoyt's body. The day that Krista Hoyt's body was found. So apparently a bank was robbed, and this is when investigators actually then returned to that bank robbery scene, as there was evidence where there was a gun, a screwdriver, a bag of money, and a cassette player stored. And they found tools matching the marks left at both the Gainesville murder apartment complexes and audio diaries that were made there about the crimes that happened. Later, it was discovered that on August 5th, 1990, Danny broke into the home of Janet Frake in Sarasota, Florida. He bound and gagged her with duct tape, and he then sexually assaulted her, but this time he did not kill. So then we go to 1991 because Danny Rawlings was arrested, and Danny Rawlings was actually charged originally with 5 counts of murder. He was brought to trial nearly 4 years after the murders, and he claimed that his motive was to become a superstar, similar to infamous Ted Bundy. Get the fuck out of here. That is no one to idol. Ted Bundy? Seriously? In 1994, before his trial could get started, Danny pled guilty to all the charges. So State Attorney Rod Smith presented the penalty phase of that particular prosecution. And during his trial, Court TV actually conducted an interview with Danny's mom from her home. And in this interview, Danny's father could be heard shouting off of the camera. So, you remember, Danny shot his father twice. Once in the forehead and once in the chest. Now we hear that his father didn't die. How? I don't know, but oh my God. So the day of the sentencing finally arrived for Danny, and it was 3.5 years after the murders were committed. Judge Morris, aware of any grounds for appealing the sentence, could come from what he said, measured his words and his judgment very thoroughly. One by one, he reviewed all of the aggravating and mitigating circumstances that had been presented during the trial. He noted that all aspects of James Rawlings' history and the findings of all the doctors disputing none. He agreed that James is fucking mentally disturbed, but we're not going there. We're talking about Danny. So, The judge actually agreed that Danny Rawlings functioned at a considerably immature level, that his personality disorder did impair his ability to conform to the requirements by law, but it was not at a level which could be considered by the law as substantial. So this means that the judge found that Danny Rawlings' disorder was not a non-statutory mitigating factor, but he actually gave it a certain amount of weight to weigh in on this decision. So Judge Morris, as well as the jury, found that the aggravating factors far outweighed the mitigating circumstances, and they ordered Danny Harold Rawlings be sentenced to death for all 5 victims. So that's 5 victims. Remember how we said that there was more than 5 victims? Yeah. On April 20th, 1994, Danny Rawlings was sentenced to death. He was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and paraphilia. Yeah, sentenced to death. So, now I'm going to get to the day of execution. So, shortly before he was executed in Florida for the serial killings in Gainesville, Danny claimed responsibility for the Shreveport murders. So, he handed his spiritual advisor, Reverend Mike Hudspeth, and Florida police a handwritten confession and apology letter. So, prosecuted sentenced to death for 5 in Gainesville, and now he's confessing to the 3 in Shreveport. So that would be your 8, right? The confession reads the following. In order to fulfill all things, that no stone be unturned, hereby I make a formal written statement concerning the murders of Julie, Tom, and Sean Grissom in my hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana. Hal Corder, Julie Grissom's former fiance, is 100% innocent, totally pure of that crime. I, and I alone, are guilty. It was my hand that shook those precious lights out of this old dark world. With all my heart and soul, I could and wish I could bring them back. Being a native son of Shreveport, I can only offer this confession of deep felt remorse over the loss of such fine, outstanding souls. I have wept an ocean of tears, by which mournful doth float upon a sea of regret. At the time, DNA was in its infancy. We didn't have the DNA to rely on, but they had very little evidence. And to help eliminate all of this was Don Ashley, a retired detective. So, Danny confessed to killing the people in Shreveport, and then says that he cried and he wanted to clear his conscience, and he feels remorseful for killing them because they were great people. Okay. So Danny Rawlings. Y'all want to hear his last meal request? Even though this motherfucker shouldn't even got one. But I'm always fascinated with last meal requests. A lot of states have stopped doing this, but at this point in time, they were still doing it. So Danny Rawlings had his last meal of lobster tail. He sang a gospel hymn, and he made no statement immediately before his execution. And many of his victims' relatives showed up to his execution. Danny Rawlings was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on October 25th, 2006. After U.S. Supreme Court rejected a last-ditch appeal. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. Family members of the Grissoms were among the 47 people who watched Danny Rawlings die that very day. There were plans for them to attend long before the confession came. After the execution, they spoke out the following. Now, this is the Grissoms. We will never have closure on this until we close our eyes. All of us parents, for the last time. But thank God, we still had great kids. We have grateful memories, and that's what keeps them going. And that came from Julie Grissom's mom, Joyce. And Zachary, which is the brother of Sean Grissom, said, I think it was too easy on him. But what can you do? He's gone now, and I'm thankful for that. So, Sean Grissom was murdered at age 8, and his brother wasn't there at that time. So, Sean would have actually been 25 years old on the day of Danny Rawlings' execution. Some of Danny's cellmates said he confessed to the Shreveport murders, and investigators did have enough evidence linking him to the crimes. The case against Danny in Florida was so much stronger than the ones in Shreveport, but Shreveport prosecutors decided to not take their case any further out of fear it might actually mess things up in the Gainesville murder cases. So they didn't charge Danny with those murders. But Danny told his minister he wanted to confess for 2 reasons. The first is he wanted to clear the original suspect, who was Julie Grissom's fiance, of any suspicion. Then, second, Danny also wanted to show his regret to the Grissom family. So, not sure if this is actually legit regret by Danny, but he's trying to show remorse on the Grissom murders. Sandra London, who collaborated with Danny on The Making of a Serial Killer, the true story of the Gainesville murders in the killer's own words, actually was one of the people who had written about Danny Rawlings. Danny Rawlings' crime spree inspired screenwriter Kevin Williamson to write the 1996 slasher film Scream, which became a successful horror franchise. The fact that this dude did all of this, and then someone thought that a movie about this, and then that movie became a huge fucking hit. It's just so crazy. And I bet nobody really knows that Scream came from Danny Rawlings. But Sandra collaborated with Danny in the hit series Making of a Serial Killer, and she developed this relationship with him behind bars that was focused on that particular episode of First Person by Errol Morris. Danny and Linda became romantically involved, and they actually became engaged with one another. Like, I'm sorry, it just shocked the hell out of me. Like, you know what this man did. You're doing an investigation with him, but yet you fall in love with him? What the fuck is wrong with you? What? The series overviewed their romance, his artwork, and his supposed feelings of remorse over the crimes that he committed. So Danny actually was a good artist. This particular show, The Making of a murder, it included a segment of Danny using one of his hearings as an opportunity to publicly display his affection, serenading Miss London in the courtroom. A 2007 independent feature film titled The Gainesville Ripper, based on accounts of killings, was shot in Gainesville and Jacksonville, Florida. And in the film, Danny is actually portrayed by Zachary Memos. Danny was a suspect of an episode of Body of Evidence from the case files of Dale Hinman, a court TV show, which was actually transmitted as a Crime Scene USA Body of Evidence on Discovery Channel in the UK. And then another episode of Forensic Factor titled Killing Spree, which originally aired on Discovery Channel in Canada, but rebroadcasted in America on the Science Channel. So all of this is happening because of Danny's crimes. In 2013, a TV documentary series called The Real Story aired an episode profiling the movie Scream. It aired on July 28, 2013, and it tells the story of Danny Rawlings' murders in a very graphic detail. And on November 24, 2018, there was an episode that was aired by Murder Made Me Famous. The premiere episode of another movie or TV show called Mark of a Serial Killer called Pose to Kill was actually presented as well. So all these people are making all these movies and TV shows about this whole ordeal. it's just crazy. So on January 14th, 2022, Discovery Plus actually premiered a paranormal documentary called Scream, The True Story. And this stars Steve, Shippey, and Cindy Kaza. Shippey and Kaza conduct a paranormal investigation in Danny's childhood home in Shreveport, Louisiana. So they went to the home in Shreveport, Louisiana, where Danny was raised and abused by his father. His mother attempted suicide. Danny attempted suicide. Like, it was just a whole fucking distraught process. But they went over there and did a show. So crazy. So, this is a case of Danny Rawlings, y'all. This motherfucker killed a lot of people. I didn't want us to be remorseful. Where was that remorse for you whenever you gutted this demon, you decapitated one, you posed their fucking bodies, humiliated them, had sex with their corpse, raped people? Like, you're just an overall fucking piece of shit. For one person who was investigating him to fall in love with him? What the fuck? This is disturbing. Lord Jesus, take the wheel. Oh, man. So, Danny was actually, he was executed by lethal injection. But he did confess to the gruesome murder. So, terrorized people. People was trying to sleep in groups so they wouldn't be a victim of Danny. And like I said, the Shreveport murders were probably something that most people didn't even know about him. The Gainesville murder, or the Gainesville Ripper, whatever you want to call Daniel Rawlings. So, if you enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on any of our podcast apps. We're currently on every single one. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, iHeart, Amazon, Wondery, wherever you listen. And be sure to come back for a discussion of our next case, which is yet another serial killer. You may know him as Derek Todd Lee. Yeah, that crazy fucker. Yeah, that's our next case. So, this one didn't end up being a two-parter. I could have went into more gruesome details in reference to Mr. Danny, but look, he had a shit poor childhood. He didn't know what true family love was, never had that relationship, never celebrated birthdays or holidays. His father continuously beat them, mother attempted suicide. Like, it was just overall shitty. But he didn't have to go and kill all these people, breaking these homes apart. I'm curious to think what you know about Danny Rawlings. Did you know about these Shreveport murders, or did you just know him for the infamous Gainesville Ripper? Be sure to write to us. We at criminalbehaviorpodcast@gmail.com. You can also visit our website at Criminalist Behavior Podcast Louisiana True Crime Podcast.com. Or you can hit us up on social media. We on Insta, TikTok, Facebook, wherever. I can't remember all of them. But you can also follow us on our Patreon, and you just look up Criminalist Behavior Podcast. Also, we did just come out with the December newsletter. This is the first newsletter that I come out with, and this is going to be a monthly newsletter that I'm going to send out. It details all of true crime events or podcast events happening within the area or throughout the United States, and just general information. There you'll get like what the top 24 podcasts were in true crime. Also, different events happening within Louisiana. Just to give you a hint, one of them could be a murder tour in New Orleans. And it gives you opportunity to get out the house, number one. Number two, to learn about different things happening in historic New Orleans. And then three, just to have fun a night on the town. So, y'all, just check it out. I got the newsletter. It's posted on all of social media. It's going to be posted within this episode's clip notes, and it's also going to be posted on all the other apps. So if you have any issues, again, just go ahead and reach out to me. I love hearing from you, feedback from the cases, whether I can make it a bit better for you or for our listeners. what you want to hear. I am actually about to start doing other cases outside of Louisiana, but that'll be on our Patreon, so you'll have to subscribe to our Patreon to hear those cases. And we're almost finished with 2024, y'all. Christmas is 2 weeks away. And I'm planning on having a total of 50 episodes for this year. This is our first year. This is our first season. And we're going to end the year with 50 episodes total. So, y'all just keep on listening. Keep being good. And I love to have you. So, our Patreon packages, we have 3. The Couillons, which is actually a free package. Just how you're listening to us all the time. We also have our Go-Getters, which is like the best package ever. And if you visit our Patreon page, you'll see what it has to offer. But we're actually starting to partner with Bonfire and Printify. We're actually about to get some merch out. So stay tuned. You can visit the website. I will post any updates as I get them. But we're working on developing merch for you all. So that'll be great. Get y'all some merch out there. All of your famous podcasters and everybody is doing it. But they actually reached out to me and we're designing some things. So yeah, y'all stay tuned. But thank y'all for listening. I really hope y'all enjoy y'all day. And until next time, this is your host, Sarah Sue, Criminalist Behavior Podcast, a Louisiana True Crime Podcast. Y'all have a great day. Bye.